This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today.
Very few pathways create 10x. And that's what I want to jump into today. 10x, man, it seems crazy to think about setting a 10x goal, right? Many of you may have thought through that or been motivated or, to do that at some point. And then maybe you get pushed back, right? From friends, family, other people, in your network. They think you're crazy, right? For trying to do that. That has been me before. I'm going to talk about a little bit of that today. And actually I'm going to go through just a few highlights from a recent book. You've probably heard of it. I hope you have by now. And if not, I hope that you will listen or read this book soon. It is one that has challenged me in a big way. And it's called 10X is Easier Than 2X. It's by Dan Sullivan and Benjamin Hardy. I really enjoy a number of their books. I've actually did a few podcasts on Who Not How. That was when they wrote a year or two ago, or maybe longer. And man, a great read as well, which I would highly encourage. There's another one. Actually, they've done a few, but I would encourage you to look them up, and because these are they're very practical stuff, or they lay out some things that help you to actually implement some of these things as well, which I appreciate. But they make me think and think differently often, and so I enjoy that kind of reading. But that's what we're going to get into today on your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Well, in the introduction, which I also encourage you not to skip, he dives into the life of Michelangelo and the hardships and the risks that Michelangelo had to take to get to the next level. And he 10x'd time and time and time again. I won't go through all that today, but I want you to go and listen to that or read it because it's encouraging. And I was sharing that with our family and my boys. I want them to just think that way, right? Even from a young age, and just talking through and what he did, Michelangelo, to 10x again and again and again. So, but getting on to chapter 1, 2, we'll go through a couple of them today. And again, this is 10x is easier than 2x. Man, think through that, even just that title for a minute. And how to implement that, because that is just completely against what we would typically think, right? But he says seemingly impossible goals are more practical than possible goals because impossible goals force you outside of your current level of knowledge and assumptions. I mean, that is such a big part of the book, just that one sentence. One way we have applied that, or I did early on, is the podcast, which you all know, doing 7 times what most other people are doing. And I was called crazy by a number of people that I respected and trusted. And it made me question, should I really do this? Should I do a 7-day a week? Is that just insanity? And I get more questions now, has it been worth it? And, if you look at the trajectory of our business, it should be pretty obvious it's been worth it. But it hasn't been easy, that's for sure. However, what it did early on is it made me think differently, right? I knew doing 7 days a week, there was no way that I was going to be able to do everything. And if I'd been doing a weekly show, I would have tried to have done everything, the show notes, the editing. I said, oh, you know what? I can save the money. I'll go get it done. And I guarantee you, I would have gotten so behind that we would have quit. And, but instead, since we 7x'd at the time, right? Or at least the number of podcasts, it made me think different. There was no way possible that I could do all those things. So I didn't even try. Right? I didn't try to learn how to do the show notes. I didn't try to learn how to edit the audio or video or whatever. I knew that I had to go find people to do that. There was no way around it. So it made me think differently from the very beginning, just in that regard whatsoever. And then the first deal that my business partner, Sam, and I did was a $20 million community. And we also had to think differently, right? To make that happen. That was a major step for us, at the time. And I think for most, right? To do that, your first syndication to be that big. And that seems crazy, right? To most, but that's 10xing. That's more than 10xing, right? Where most people are encouraging you to buy a single family home, right? To rent it out or maybe renovate it. And and then maybe get a duplex and then a few duplexes and a fourplex, right? We just skipped that and said, you know what, we're going to go after it and we're going to create a much bigger goal here. And it made us think and do things differently. So Dan also says, very few pathways create 10X. With genuine reflection, a 10X target spotlights the few pathways, the high leverage strategies and relationships with extreme upside. So this was helpful for me to think through, right? And it becomes when you start thinking this way, and I have to remind myself every day, nearly just to think this way, but it becomes a filter, right? And that's what I like about this thinking, is that it becomes a filter when you can start to set that 10X goal. Like, when something comes in your path, right? We all have shiny object syndrome. I feel like, it's a constant battle. I feel like as an entrepreneur, like, oh, I could go do that. I could go do that. But when you are thinking 10X, you can quickly use that as a filter to think, okay, is that going to help me get to 10X? Because if you're thinking 2X, a lot of these things could do that, right? A lot of things could help you 2X. You can just go work a lot harder and probably 2X. But it's not about working harder. It's about working easier. I mean, having easier, work, but more focused, right? And so 10X goals, and it just enables you to clearly identify the 20% of things and people in your life that are producing most of the results, and the 80% of things and people in your life that are holding you back. And so it becomes that filter that helps you think through that. Going for 2X growth means you can keep 80% of your existing clients' roles, behaviors, and mindsets. Only minor tweaks are needed. So you don't have to change a whole lot, right, to go 2X. But going 10X means you must eliminate the 80% of your existing clients' roles, behaviors, and mindset. 10X requires a full-scale transformation of yourself as well as everyone and everything around you. And that's Dan Sullivan or Benjamin Hardy there saying that you have to eliminate that 80% of all those things. And I struggle with that, right, in a big way. Obviously, have a number of friends that I'm not going to eliminate the friendships, right? I'm just not. But however, when going back to the podcast example here, for me, think about I'd never really spoken into a mic before, and then started a daily podcast. And so it was a major jump for me. It was thinking 10X. It was pushing myself in a massive way out of my comfort zone. And even the thought of starting a podcast about real estate syndication, and had never syndicated a deal, right? People thought I was crazy, right? I mean, it was just called crazy. So think about that, right? I couldn't care about what other people thought. I just had to jump in and do it. And so I agree with a lot of this. I don't agree with eliminating 80% of your current relationships, but I do understand what he means here. And so, I would agree with, shifting the focus, right? More on the 20% of your network and increasing that 20% in a big way, right? And constantly thinking that way, right? You're going to keep taking that 20%. And as it continues to grow, you're going to keep figuring out, okay, what's the 20% now, right? You may do this every year or every 6 months or every 3 months. You're thinking through, hey, what's the 80-20 here? What's the 80%? And we'll get into this, that we're going to delegate, right? We're going to give to somebody else. So you have to be thinking that often. But you have to think about like 2X is linear, right? And just, growing to continue growing, right? It requires a lot of effort, right? You're going to work a lot harder often just to 2X. And it's just working harder, not smarter often. He says it is quantitatively focused, right? You're just doing more of what you're doing now, right? Without respect to quality, uniqueness, or transformation is what he says. So I like thinking about that. Like, what am I doing? That's 2X thinking, right? Versus 10X, which is non-linear, right? It's enormous growth does not require typically more effort often. Like the podcast did require a lot more effort from me. However, it could have required even more if I hadn't have built a team, if it hadn't have made me think differently, like we talked about, like I already mentioned. But it often requires less, but better, right? It's qualitatively focused, is what he says. You've elevated your vision, your focus, such that you're now transforming the value and impact of what you do for increasingly specific people. So, you're thinking very different at this level, right? You're not thinking like you used to think. And that is such a hard part for me, I think for everybody, right? I have to, like I mentioned, I have to continually remind myself to think this way and to use it as a filter. And so every time you make a 10x jump, you do so by letting go of so many things that were in that 80%, right? And then going deeper into, just a more concentrated 20%, right? The 20% that you are uniquely really good at, and then letting go of that 80%, and hiring those who's, right? Go back to who, not how. And I would encourage you to read that book or even look at the podcast that I did, just reviewing that book. But I couldn't recommend them enough to go through these books, but Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan. But you need to hire the who's, right? And that was what we did in the podcast, 7 versus 1. I knew I could not do it all. I had to hire people. So hired numerous team members, even within LifeBridge Capital. We've hired, many people who are, everybody, right? They either are when they're hired or they've become better at their specific tasks than I am at doing their tasks. Where I used to do all those things, or Sam used to do all those things. It was pretty much split up between he and I for a long time, right? And then we start hiring people that are much better at, with specific skill sets or experience than we have, right? And that's how we've continued to grow. That's how we've just gotten better over and over. But every time you go 10x by letting go of the 80% and going all in on your desired 20%, you dramatically increase the quality and quantity of your freedoms as a person, which are time, money, relationships, and purpose. And I can look back and think, no doubt, that happened, in my life by thinking this way, by pushing in a way. And obviously I had not read this book at that time. I wasn't really thinking that way, but what I knew is I'd seen this work for different people, right? And I thought, okay, I'm just going to go do it. We're going to go make it happen. It was a mindset shift for myself, thinking I can make this happen versus being scared to go make it happen, right? Or backing down when other people thought I was crazy or say, don't do that, Whitney. You should never do a daily podcast. That's way too much effort. You're going to quit, right? You're going to, whatever, all those pushbacks that I received. And, and I would also mention that at that time, I had a mentor and Joe Fairless, he's a good friend of mine now. And even then it was so crucial to have somebody in my life that was already thinking this way. And again, it was just the Lord providing somebody like that in my life. But I remember going to Joe at this time and thinking, well, and this is very early on, before we launched the podcast, and telling him about what these other people were saying, right? And again, these were 2 or 3 people that were highly respected in our industry that probably most all of you have heard of, and who said, Whitney, you're crazy. Don't do that. Don't do that. And so I talked to Joe about it, and Joe immediately said, well, that's why you have to do it, right? That's why you have to do it, because it's too much work for everybody else, right? And so it was a lot more work, but it wasn't 10xing my work as far as me trying to do all the parts of the podcast, right? It has been a ton of work. But back to the mentoring, it's I already had somebody, right, that was already thinking that way. And so that, if not for that, I may have backed off and thought, I shouldn't do that. I should listen to these people who care about me. They did. They were speaking into my life and trying to protect me. But I needed people who were already thinking at a much bigger scale, right? And Joe was that person at the time, and still is. It's a great mentor, still to this day, and friend. And so can't say enough good things about him. But I would say it's still a struggle, right? Even now, to just maintain that vision of how to 10x and again and again. And if you read that about Michelangelo, you'll see how he did that time and time and time again. But he had to take big risk. I would encourage you to listen to that. But it's so easy to get trapped in 2x thinking, right? It's so easy to do that. And often I'm telling people, they tell me, well, how can I get more done, Whitney? Or what am I going to do to scale? And I just ask them, well, who's on your team? Oftentimes they haven't hired their first assistant, right? They haven't hired the first person to start taking anything off their plate. And then they push back and say, well, it's just not going to work. I'm just going to have to, train them, and then they're going to quit. I'm going to train somebody else. And well, of course you are. Of course you are. But it's 2x thinking to think that you're going to continue doing everything. And so, yes, that's just one example, but I've had numerous assistants, right? And I have grown, and as I've hired different assistants and trained them and whatnot, and right, they've gotten better every time, and they've got higher paid every time as well, right? But and actually, as we've grown, they're doing a lot more things for me, right? Of that 80%, they're doing more and more, and I have to continually, like I said, remind myself of this, to think that way and use that as a filter. It's a constant battle not to think, I'll just work harder. I'll just work harder and make it happen. Or, to increase my income or increase whatever you're trying to do, I'll just go work harder. It's a constant battle to think differently. Continuing our series today in 10x is easier than 2x. Going 10x involves a continuous process of increasing the quality and decreasing the quantity of everything you do. So think about that, right? A continuous process. It's not a one thought and done, right? It's not a check the box and it's done even. It's a continuous process. And like I said, I have to remind myself constantly to have this filter like we talked about last time. And it's really a filter, what I find, that a focus, right? And focus is so crucially important to scale and to do big things. I was thinking about, actually, it reminded me, there's a story about when Warren Buffett and Bill Gates met. And I think it was a meeting that maybe Bill Gates' father somehow set up with Warren Buffett. I don't know the whole story behind it, but ultimately they met. You've probably heard the story about how, I think it was Bill Gates asked Warren Buffett, one word to describe his success or how he got there, or something like that. And actually, they both wrote down this word, a word, on a piece of paper, turned it over, and then they both turned their paper over and they both said, focus. So I don't know if you've heard that before, but man, I do believe there is a lot of truth in that, in being able to focus. And thinking through this book has helped me to, I think, focus more. And I have to continually remind myself, and I think you probably do as well. But, obviously, you've probably heard the saying too, how you do everything, anything is how you do everything. And, I think, personally, I struggle with that statement, but because there are some things that I'm not as particular about, but there's a lot of things I'm very particular about. So, I maybe the way it's done, or the way a job is done, or expectations about different things. There's some ways I wish I was more particular about certain areas of my life or habits, whatnot. But shedding your 2x identity can be difficult, because as people, we have the tendency to avoid loss, overvalue what we currently own, and desire to be seen as consistent. So, I find often you're still surrounded, right, by those same people, or the same, those same expectations. And often they may not even be actual expectations of the people around you, but it's what you're assuming are the expectations of the people around you, and you're trying to still meet that expectation, right? And it may not even be a true expectation, and it may be at times, but often, it's because you're not changing, right? Who you're surrounding yourself with, and who are those people that are at the level that you're trying to get to, right? And we've talked about that so many times on the show. How are you working on that and changing that? And so you are shedding that 2x identity, right? But you're ultimately surrounding yourself with people that are 10xers, right? That are not just doing it, or not just thinking it, but actually doing it, right? And I think thinking it is the first key. Your identity is the story you believe about yourself and the standards you hold for yourself. So what do you believe about yourself? So, where does your confidence come from? And I hope most of you know this, but the Lord is my confidence. And I have to remind myself of that also, right? He's been faithful every time in the past, forever. And there's never been a time he has not been faithful. And so I against what every most self-help books and entrepreneurial books would tell you, or 10x books or 100x books or whatever, when they're trying to get you to think that way, right? They're going to tell you to love yourself, believe in yourself, all those things. Well, I think most of that is there is a lot to the mindset there, but it's I think baloney, because the Lord is my confidence, and He is the only reason that I've been able to do any of this stuff in real estate and have the stamina to keep going. It is only because of Him. But I quickly feel like I can do it on my own, right? And move away and quit thinking about, the Lord is my strength and my help. So I hope He's yours as well. But defining and choosing your own minimum standards, no matter how seemingly impossible to yourself and others, is fundamental to experiencing a 10x transformation. So think about defining and choosing your own minimum standards. What is that for you? Have you been purposeful enough to even think through that, much less write some of those standards down? And to have it, almost reverse engineered, right? How to get there. We've talked about that as well. But how do you do that, right? Well, start thinking about it, right? And maybe by the end of the week, you're going to write some things down, right, around that specific thing. So the standards you believe. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but that you believe others have for you, right? It's a hard part to think through or to move away from. Others project their standards on your whole life, and eventually you have to be willing to not care, right, about what others think or about it. And you have to set that standard for yourself. And if you're still around the same friends you had in high school, there's a good chance that they're not thinking this way, or maybe they've not pushed to grow themselves in this way. And so, you have to think through, man, what is pushing you? Who are you surrounding yourself by? It is so important. I've seen it personally time and time again. And I've had to, I've been a part of masterminds where, I've kind of outgrew them, right? But they were really good for me at that stage, potentially in my growth and in my entrepreneurial journey. And I actually have met, there's guys that I was in a mastermind with 6 or 7 years ago that when we met, we were at very different levels. This guy was, when I was thinking of one guy specifically, way ahead of me. And I just talked to him a week or two ago, and he's still way ahead of me, but we've both grown a lot. But neither of us are still in that mastermind, right? We found other places to keep growing, to surround ourselves with people who are way ahead of us, right? And it is a continual thing of looking and searching for those groups, those people who are going to mentor you and push you and are going to help you to raise your standards, right? Your minimum standards are going to go higher and higher and higher. I hope they do anyway. Evolving yourself to the level of a higher minimum standard requires commitment and courage, which eventually leads to the development of new capabilities and confidence. No doubt about it. That's exactly what happened, right? I went to this mastermind. I met all these people. All of a sudden, I'm encouraged. I'm creating different habits in my life because of these people. I'm reading different things because of these people who are pushing me in different ways. I'm performing in different ways in the business because of the things I'm learning, things I'm being pushed by. Right? It's affecting not just me, but my entire family, all of our employees, and right. So it is changing a lot about who we are, because of raising that higher minimum standard, right? Taking that courage, right? To do that and committing that level of commitment to raise that standard. So it's crucially important. And then we're going to get in a little bit here to what's called the 80-20 principle, right? You've probably heard of this. If you've not, I encourage you to look this up. We talked about it even during maybe in the last segment, but man, it's worth thinking through in the tasks that you do. So Jimmy Donaldson's 3 ingredients to his 10x process are: number 1, thinking exponentially and linearly bigger, right? Number 2, hyper focusing on quality over quantity. And number 3, building a team to handle the 80% so you can focus and improve in your craft, right? So think through that, building the team, right? Delegating the 80%. And I would ask you, do you even know what the 80 and the 20% are? Like what is involved in that for you. And one tip I often tell people, even some people I've mentored, it's always an issue of time management for myself as well. It always has been. It probably always will be. It's a fight, right, to keep my calendar, as minimal as possible, right? So I'm still keeping what's most important, right? Being at home and with the kids, spending time with the kids and my wife and being involved in our church and those things that, it's so easy for me to quickly fill my schedule up so fast and so much that the most important things, really the reason, right? We claim we're doing all this stuff for our family or kids, whatever, but if they're really that important, right, we're going to make time for them as well. You're going to see that time commitment also. But I ask you to guys often, or that I've mentored, is like, what's in your 80%? And this week, let's start writing things down. Like throughout the day, what have you done? What are you working on? What are you doing? Right? Or do you know? Most people have no clue. And then we're going to talk through that 20%, right? What is that 20%? What is that thing that you love to do, right? That you are passionate about. And let's dive in there on those skills. Even that, we're going to start to cut up into 80-20, right? And start delegating as well. So we can get hyper focused, right? Like we've talked about. 10X goals are easier than 2X goals for many reasons. 10X goals are less competitive. Yeah, less competitive. There's so much there we could talk about. 10X goals require you to focus on very few things rather than many, which improves your brain's ability to focus. Research shows that continual task switching makes flow and high performance basically impossible. 10X goals promote nonlinear approaches, which produce novel and competitive free or competition free solutions. So finally, 10X goals foster leadership and teamwork, wherein you stop doing everything yourself, managing others, or here's a big one, needing to be right. So that's a big one for most leaders, especially when you're so focused on 10X. Or if you're that kind of individual, you can think you're always the right one. But if you're going to 10X, guess what? You better understand you're going to be wrong often, and it's good. Not that you're wrong often, maybe, but that you're trying enough that you are wrong, but also that you're surrounding yourself with a team of people that are doing that 80%, maybe even part of that 20%. A lot better than you, right? And so hopefully you are wrong in ways that you're pushing forward, right? You're pushing hard forward, hard enough that you're making some mistakes. However, you're surrounding yourself with people that can come along beside you. And I've done this and have to do it. I have to know that people around me are better at what they do than I am, because that's why I hired them, right? And that's what I need them for. I want them to be so much better at these things than I am, right? Creating 10X results doesn't require you to be 10X better than everyone else, right? Even being 10 to 20% better and different from everything else can produce 10X bigger results than even the outliers of a particular niche or field.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.